Hi guys. All right, I'm going to read our story for this week, and this one is called The Dog That Dug for Dinosaurs, and this is a biography. So it doesn't really look like a biography because there aren't real pictures. Lots of times in biographies they are. This one is illustrated. The author is Shirley Ray Redmond, and it says at her home in New Mexico, she begins her day by waking up early and watching the many birds that come to the feeders in her yard. Then she's ready to sit down and start writing. Sounds like a nice way to start the day. The illustrator is Stacy Schuett, and it says, even as a child, she wanted to be an artist or a writer. I was a dreamy kind of little kid who loved to make stuff up, she says. She has illustrated many books, including ones about pirates and trees. All right. Oh, my computer froze for... There we go. All right, a long, long time ago, there was a little dog named Trey. He was black and white all over. He had friendly brown eyes and a very wiggly tail. Trey lived in England. Trey was a real dog, and this is an honestly true story about him. Trey loved two things most in the whole world. First, he loved Mary Anning. She was 12 years old and lived with her family in a small cottage near the beach in Lyme Regis. Secondly, Trey loved going with Mary to dig for fossils. So, what are fossils anyway? They are the remains of animals and plants that died a long time ago. When a leaf or bone gets pressed between layers of sea mud, it leaves an imprint. After many, many years, the mud hardens to rock. So that picture right there, this one is a real picture showing you what a fossil would look like. Trey and Mary knew that they would find the very best fossils high up on the cliffs around the beach. They climbed up there every day. Trey sniffed the rocks. Sniff, sniff. He pawed the dirt. Scratch, scratch. Mary used a small hammer and chisel. Tap, tap, tap. With these tools, Mary carefully cut fossils out of the cliff just as her father had shown her. Trey watched as she placed the fossils in her basket. Most of them looked like seashells. Mary and Trey sold them as souvenirs to the tourists that came by stagecoach to swim at the beach near their home. Any idea what a stagecoach is? If you look in the back of the picture, you can see part of a horse and like a wagon. That was called a stagecoach. So back when the story was taking place, there were not cars yet. So a lot of the people either walked or used what they called a stagecoach. One day, Trey and Mary discovered some very large bones sticking out of the rocks. They were huge. Trey growled and tried to dig the bones out. Mary used her hands to brush away the loose dirt. Trey, we've discovered a monster, she declared. The bones were much too big for Trey and Mary to remove themselves. I'll go for help, Mary said. You stay here, Trey. Trey barked loudly and sat down in front of the bones. He was a very good guard dog. And you can see in the picture what it looks like that they're digging up. So they knew it wasn't just a normal seashell or something that they typically find. Mary ran all the way back to town and asked some grown-ups to help her. Trey and I have found something really special in the cliff, she said. She told them. Just wait and see. When the men saw the giant rib bones in the side of the cliff, they were amazed. What a beast, they cried. Look at those sharp teeth. Is it a crocodile, one man asked, or a stubby whale? We don't know what it is, Mary admitted, but we know it's something special, don't we, Trey? Trey yipped and wagged his tail. So as they kept digging and kind of scraping away at the sand and stuff, they discovered kind of what the illustration is showing in the picture. A rich man who lived nearby heard about the sea monster. He hurried to see it for himself. I'll buy it, he cried. I will give it to the British Museum in London. Do you know what it is, Mary asked. It is called an ichthyosaur, the man told her. That means fish lizard, he explained. It's like a dinosaur with fins. Now, the nice thing, sometimes when you're reading stories, it will tell you how to pronounce the word, just like when we talked about pronouncing words in a dictionary. So they wrote the name of the dinosaur, how it would normally be spelled, but then in parentheses, they wrote it how it sounds. So ichthyosaur. So not really how it's spelled. That's why they give us a little hint, because that wouldn't be a typical word that you would read. And if they didn't have the pronunciation there, I probably would have said it wrong. So that's helpful when stories do that. Sweet. The amazing news spread about the gigantic fish lizard and the dog and the little girl who found it. Soon, many strangers came. Oh, hold on. My page turned. Soon, many strangers came to Lyme Regis where Mary and Trey lived. They all wanted to hunt for fossils too. The men wore tall top hats. The women wore frilly bonnets. They carried pretty umbrellas called parasols. Mary shook her head and smiled. She rubbed Trey's soft ears. They watched the strangers together. They don't have the right tools, Mary whispered. They are wearing the wrong kinds of shoes. Aren't they silly, Trey? Trey yipped and chased his tail. So if you remember the pictures before where it showed Mary and then the pictures now, that's why she kind of thinks they're silly. They're all dressed up pretty in these beautiful gowns and really nice fancy outfits, and they don't have the tools that they need for digging either. So she kind of thinks it's funny how they're dressed and how they're getting ready to look for these fossils. Curious scientists visited Lyme Regis too. One man came from the University of Oxford. His name was William Buckland. He went to the old carpenter shop where Mary and Trey sold their fossils. "Can you show me where you found your ichthyosaur, young lady?" he said politely. "Do you think that you could find the exact spot again?" "Trey can find it," Mary boasted. That just means she's kind of bragging because she knows how awesome the dog is. Together, Mary and Mr. Buckland followed the little dog across the beach and up to the cliffs. Trey sniffed the rocks. Sniff, sniff.
Mom.
He pawed the dirt. Scratch, scratch.
I'll go somewhere.
He pawed the dirt. Scratch, scratch. Suddenly he yipped. Then he sat down. Mary pointed. It was the exact place where she had discovered the strange fish lizard. "What an intelligent dog," Mr. Buckland declared. Trey wagged his tail. Trey and Mary continued to dig for fossils. They were very careful. Mary watched for falling rocks like her dad told her. Trey looked out for storms and high tides. Then one day they discovered another giant creature. "Look, Trey," Mary cried. "It's a sea dragon, or is it a sea dragon?" Trey sniffed the skeleton and snapped at it with his teeth. The creature had a long, long neck. Its backbone was like a humped turtle shell. Instead of feet and legs, it had 4 large paddles. But it wasn't a sea dragon. Mr. Buckland called it a plesiosaur. And again, they have those parentheses to help us pronounce that word. Also, it's mentioned a couple times when they're finding these fossils, they have to be really careful. If they were just digging with a shovel, they would end up chopping the fossils in half, and then that would ruin the fossils that they were finding. One day, Trey and Mary found a fossil that no one in England had ever found before. This one had huge bony wings like a bat and a long, sharp jaw. Trey growled. "It looks like a gigantic flying lizard," Mary declared. The scientists thought so too, and that's why they named it a pterodactyl. This means lizard with wings. Over the years, Trey, Mary, and Mr. Buckland became good friends. They showed him where to find the best fossils in Lyme Regis. Mr. Buckland brought books about dinosaurs for Mary. He brought beef bones for Trey. Mary, with Trey on her lap, studied her books every day. When Trey's whiskers turned gray and Mary was all grown up, they still collected fossils and sold them in the old carpenter's shop. There were boxes and baskets filled with fossils on the floor and on shelves. Some of the fossil creatures were so big they couldn't fit through the door. Sometimes children and tourists stopped in to buy fossils of ancient sand dollars or tiny fish and curly shells. Many scientists came to the shop to buy fossils too. They brought carts and wagons to haul away the really large ones. And the picture on 436 of the pterodactyl, that would be a real picture, not an illustration. Trey and Mary Anning became very famous. Today, if you go to the Natural History Museum in London, you can see the large fossils they discovered together. You can also see a famous painting of Mary holding her fossil basket and Trey, the dog that dug for dinosaurs. So kind of a cool story. Lots of times when we do biographies, they're just about people, but this one was just as much about Trey as it was about Mary. So they were kind of a really good team to discover these fossils that they were looking for. I don't know, I haven't looked, but maybe try to look up the Natural History Museum in London. I don't know if they have any pictures maybe that you could find of Mary and Trey, but that would be something kind of cool to look for. So hopefully you enjoyed this story.